we'll be hearing from Andy Kennedy today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Andy is a sound designer and sound effects editor. So we're going to start, as we do, with your career beginning. So would you like to just talk us through how you got into film and, you know, where that interest came from?
It started when I was really young. I loved film, went to the movies a lot and wanted to make films. In the time frame I come from, making films meant you went and got a Super 8 camera and you literally went out and made films with your friends. That enthusiasm boiled over to the point when I had to eventually find a job, and I wrote to masses of production companies at the time just to get a job as a runner. So I started at the bottom. I didn't go to university, I didn't do a course, I didn't take further education. I actually went into the industry at the very bottom rung of the ladder. You know, being a runner, you are trying to find out what you want to do. So I ended up in editorial, working as an assistant editor, and eventually found myself becoming freelance. And it was one of those things that in the days of film, which was, I'm talking pre-computer, the assistant editor did all the sound work.
Right.
So I ended up doing the soundtracks for documentary series, news, you know, everything you could probably imagine that you'd do working in commercial television and in the BBC. And eventually I moved into drama, which is really, I think, where I wanted to work. And then started learning a few skills on the road, as it were, and found that this was my forte. Was actually, I wasn't so interested in the picture side of things. I was more interested in editing the sound and figuring out things on sound. But the sound designer basically is employed to give the show a particular style. In my case, having been doing sound for so long, I have got quite a good collection of audio. And, you know, I'll do my little mantras. I've got my opportunity here, is that all you young aspiring sound designers out there, first thing you need to do is buy a sound recording machine. It doesn't really matter what it is, and a decent microphone, and start capturing, accumulating noises and getting as many as you can so that you can actually build a library. And that's generally where I start on a project, is I try and build a library for what we're doing. So if it's Game of Thrones, obviously it's medieval fantasy, so you can guess it's going to be horses, it's going to be, you know, castle interiors, winds, ambiences, things like that, the sort of things that you need for those sort of things. If it's something to do with science fiction, then it's more in the realms of mechanics. Some of those sounds don't exist. If they don't exist, you either have to go and find them, scrounge them, borrow them, or actually make them. You know, you have to get down and dirty and actually get into making something from nothing and see if you can make something convincing. Sound and sound design, especially in post-production, is a form of collaboration. It's never solely one person's role, and there are many aspects of the sound which involve different people. So, you know, you could start with the top level of it, which is when the actual sound is being recorded, which is the production sound recordist. He will have someone with him, which would be the boom swinger, or his first assistant sound. And they sometimes come with a second assistant sound or sound maintenance, and possibly a trainee. So maximum, probably on a big project, 4 people. And they're in charge of capturing the production sound on location and in studios and all those settings. Once you get into post, you've got a supervising sound editor who's basically employed to run the post-production crew, and sometimes the role of sound designer and sound post-production supervisor can be one of the same thing. Some people can do it. I find it quite difficult to manage the project and keep creative and keep supplying all the creative ingredients. They have a crew of people. Some of those members of the crew specialise in their field. So you would get a dialogue editor, and his job is to really concern himself with the production sound that the sound recordist has produced. If it's a big project, you may have what's called an ADR supervisor, editor, and the dialogue editor and the ADR supervisor will work closely together, and again they can be one of the same person depending on the budget of the film. The ADR supervisor is responsible for obviously trying to sort out what sounds or what dialogue is not being recorded and needs to be captured, and dealing with crowd and loop group stuff. And it can seem like a minimal job, but when it's a very big dialogue heavy show, you really need to have someone who knows what they're doing. And obviously it's a lot of preparation because you're preparing lines, you're recording, etc., etc. Then you have the Foley editor. He's in charge of getting the sounds recorded, preparing to record the sounds, recording the sounds and editing them afterwards for all the movements in the soundtrack, and that's generally the footstep movements. It can be spot effects, it can be a few inventive things, it can be a very creative area. That it is one of those things where you really need to know your stuff when it comes to microphone technique and what things make certain sounds. You know, sometimes small things make big epic noises. And then there's the role of the assistant editor, and we don't see them as many as we'd like in post-production sound these days, but that would be a good entry point for someone trying to start off in their career as an assistant sound editor, because you would get a bit of hands-on on all these different aspects of the sound. And then we may have a trainee stroke runner on the project as well. So that's the main sound people. Aside from that, obviously soundtracks come with music.
Yeah. So
then you have someone who's handling the music side, which is a music editor. They tend to have gone through what's called the Tonmeister course, which I think is the university in Surrey. And their specialist is being able to obviously read notation. They work closely with the arranger and the composer, and they're in charge of taking the whole thing from the recording, preparation, recording, and the delivery to the mix stage. And when we get to the mix stage, you have the re-recording mixer. Now that can be one person. On the bigger projects, it tends to be two. It can be three. And sometimes the sound designer gets involved in that process. Yeah.
How early on in the process do you think that a director-producer should bring a sound designer in?
Well, in my view, and this is my view, personal view, is we're not brought in early enough. And there's always economics that drives this forward, and it comes from an older time. It comes from days when, you know, things were always considered as, oh, we'll do that in post. In fact, some of the things that happen on the floor could be circumvented by having someone like myself around early on. To give an example, you know, I have found myself on set listening to actors talking in a room that's so echoey that they're meant to be outside, and you're thinking, well, this is not
clearly
good.
Not outside.
They're not outside.
Yeah.
There's a huge echo on it. They think this can all be fixed in post. It can be to a certain extent, but the ideal thing to do is to drape an environment, drape the set to cut down the echo. And of course, this comes out way too expensive. We'll fix it all later, and then when you actually see what was spent fixing it all later, it would have been a lot cheaper putting drapes up on set.
Right.
You know, facilitating where microphones are concealed, facilitating how the surfaces of the rooms that the actors are walking around in are covered so that you get clean dialogue, facilitating the use of certain costumes that make noises, capturing the dialogue. And of course, any action vehicles, anything that's moving around does get neglected during shoots.
Yeah.
And we normally have to pick all this up afterwards. And of course, that car they were using has been hired out on another movie, or it's in another country, or something like that. All these things can be dealt with if you get someone from post involved early. I've always found you have to start with something. So if you're doing creature vocals, you're going to have to start somewhere. So you can either use the cheapest talent in the room, which is yourself, or you can go and get something a bit more expensive, which means going out and recording lots of different creatures. And, you know, it's fun turning a swan into a dolphin and, you know, taking elements of the world of nature, like insects, depitching them to the wrong speed, and then making them go backwards in through a plug-in. You can come up with stuff, but you don't know this. I find most of the things I do come about by accident more than by me going, oh yeah, I know exactly what I need, I'm going to definitely put this is going to work. And of course, 85% of the time it doesn't work. I have to come up with a new idea. And sometimes it can involve going into a room with a series of specialist microphones and gooning around with props. I would recommend that everyone, even if you haven't got children, you go to toy shops a lot and play with all the toys in the toy shops, because they're always good places to get good sounds from. You do have to be careful of your ears, because everything can sound terribly exciting when you're in the editorial room, but eventually you're going to have to mix this stuff together, and you can build up quite a lot of loud elements, and if you haven't got any way of controlling those loud elements, you can damage your hearing. So you need to set your monitoring at a decent level so you get the sense of the proportions of the dynamics that you're trying to achieve without killing your ears. I do a lot of this stuff, and I do find you get, like I call it sonic fatigue. After a number of hours at it, you start to shut down. You can't actually hear anything anymore. You just keep trying louder noise. It's just not, it doesn't work. So you really have to be careful. And it tends to be detail that makes action sequences work. If you take apart a movie that you like that's action driven, it's a focus of what you see, not what you don't see. So for instance, in a gunshot sequence, don't track lay all the people who aren't firing on screen, because that will just end up building up a large noise. just do the people who fire the guns. And it may seem weird because it'll go bang, bang, gap, bang, bang, gap, bang, bang. But I assure you, if it's edited correctly, picture-wise, these gaps can be filled later with other interesting noises, like ricochets, bullet whizzes. Most sound recorders I do come in contact with are very keen to have young people around because you're an extra pair of hands, and you will not be idle. There's always something to do. And if it's a very busy project or a busy film, you might even be given some work to do, which is actually go and record that bus, or go and get that crowd of people over there. Things that the sound recordist can't do because he's concentrating on getting the performances of the actors, and there's just not another pair of hands around. That will obviously give you at least some hands-on, and generally our job is, because I was talking about collaboration, because of that collaboration, it's about how you relate to people, how you get on with people, and that's how teams form.